In a world both very far and very near to us all, a tale of grand import is unfolding. A tale where adventure lies just over the horizon, where good and evil do battle to determine the fate of the world, and where all is not what it may appear to be. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and today it's time to continue the chronicles of a tale that is still being told about never-changing land. Sit back, relax, and listen as I tell you all about the living history of the Duel terminal. Part 2. An Alliance Broken. 3 months have passed since Catastor and the other allies of Justice stormed the main worm encampment, and while the hive mind was able to escape, they were not able to take with them the W Nebula meteorite. The Scientists of Justice, an organization made up of the Mist Valley, Flamvel, X-Saber, and Ice Barrier tribes, had found that the meteorite was actually made of inert worm cells, and by studying their biology, Justice could explosively enhance their technology by increasing processing power and simplifying communication between units. It was an astonishing find, but not one that was universally celebrated by everyone.
How many times are you going to bring this up? You've been outvoted. Starting next week, we're moving forward with the extraterrestrial application projects.
Call it what it is.
I just said extraterrestrial application.
Worms! You want to take everything we worked for, everything we built together, and make it like them.
We're not trying to become slime creatures. We're improving upon our designs based on what we've learned. We can't turn down a blessing just because it came from our enemy.
Learn? We cracked open their husks and sucked the knowledge from them like a parasite. We didn't learn, we consumed. Does that sound familiar to you?
This conversation is over.
Look at these proposals. A device to capture worms instead of destroying them. A supercomputer that will control the Ally of Justice machines, quote, as per the worm hive mind. And don't think I don't know about the Cosmic Gateway.
How do you know about that?
I'm not wasting my time revealing my sources to a lying snake. Who else knows? I don't see very many surprised faces on the council.
Arukwazos reported that his scientists discovered that the worms had some kind of space warping capabilities, something that allowed them to travel through the depths of space. We haven't fully figured out why these worms aren't using that power against us as a weapon, but the sooner we can master it, the safer we'll be.
And why wasn't I informed? We had a deal, all of us. Any major decisions were to be brought before this council for approval, and now I find you're playing with the laws of the natural world behind my back.
It was simple, scientific eagerness. If the experiment had succeeded, we would have rid the world of the invaders right then and there. We were looking for the right time to tell you. But then you had that outburst about the Genex, and we decided it was for the best not to bring it up.
Outburst? Outburst? Those are living creatures, stewards of the planet, and you want to turn them into another wave of toy soldiers?
It's those toy soldiers that have allowed us to survive this war. And the Genex are as dedicated to fighting the worms as we are. We're just giving them the tools to fight, and we need to fight harder than ever now. Every day we don't run them down is another day they push deeper into the Naturia Forest and the Jurak Badlands. That means more resources they can use to multiply, and we're already getting word of worms that are even stronger than the last. And what's worse is that they're getting smarter. They've been disrupting our supply lines, so we still haven't been able to restore Catastor to full combat readiness. We are fighting for the fate of the world here, and I will not let some naive mystic who still lives in a cave get in the way of progress.
I will not be spoken to in such a manner! Our tribes came together to create the Allies of Justice, and despite our many years of battle, many years of war and animosity, despite every instinct in my body screaming at me not to trust you all, I was proud to call you all my companions that day. But it's clear to me that you all still see the Mist Valley as a backwoods people, and I will no longer partake in an alliance that does not respect us or the planet we are fighting for.
I'm sorry. You're right, that was very unfair of me to say. But you have to understand, there are things we need to do that—
You want to defeat our enemy by becoming our enemy, and there is no future in this. And until you all can realize this, there will be no compromise. The Thunderlord hereby dissolves the involvement of Mist Valley in justice.
Grisham, wait!
Don't you dare speak my name again. You have insulted me and my people, so do not think you can use honeyed words to convince me. Farewell.
But much led up to this falling out, because despite a strong counteroffensive, the disabling of Catastor had revealed an unfortunate flaw in the Alliance. A common enemy did not so easily make common friends. The generals of the Ice Barrier were incentivized to end this war as soon as possible, not just for their own nation's survival, but the longer it dragged on, the more political power their rivals in the church would gain, as they were now viewed as the only faction in Palakti that could protect the people with the power of the imprisoned dragons. Even now, there was talk of unsealing Gungnir to apply pressure to the fleeing worm invaders, and it was all Grunard could do as the Palakti representative of the Alliance to assure his people that was not necessary. He pushed and pushed for the Allies of Justice to strike at the worms even without their ace machine, but every battle that did not result in a decisive victory meant that the worms gathered more data and thus grew stronger. Looking for new territory to invade, the worms began to explore new avenues of expansion. Attacking the tribes head-on had been useful for jumpstarting their new evolutions, but now that they were in retreat, it was better to avoid conflict than to agitate it. And the two most viable biomes they decided on were the Naturia Forest and the Jurak Badlands. The former being a lush paradise rife with resources, populated only by plants and animals, with no military force in sight. The Jurak Badlands was similarly free of organized combatants, and while this environment was much more hazardous, their time in the ignium sulfur fields had provided them with the heat resistance necessary to endure. And not only did the Badlands offer rich mineral deposits the Naturia forests could not, that same extreme heat meant that only the Flamvel, and whichever ally of justice machines they could muster, were all that could pursue them, keeping the worms safe from a coordinated assault from justice. However, the worms' burgeoning understanding of the world they were attacking led them to make some assumptions that would prove very inconvenient. See, while no tribe held sway over the Naturia forest, it was not without its defenders. While the initial wave of inhabitants didn't have the kind of power to resist the encroaching horde, older and wiser beings would join the conflict soon enough. It felt like, for everything the worms did to advance, the Naturia retaliated in kind, using their home field advantage to pay back any aggression twice over. Likewise, in the Jurak Badlands, the worms discovered a less subtle threat. While they had fought weapon and beast alike among the tribes of justice, nothing matched the savagery of the dinosaurs' attacks, using massive jaws and piercing talons to rip open worm hide that had been cultivated over months of combating the x-sabers. And their lack of an organized military did not translate to a lack of coordination, as several millennia of evolution had honed their pack tactics instincts. But despite these advantages, no single battle could drive the worms out. Both the Naturia and the Jurak were strong, but neither could match the numbers of the worms. With justice in disarray, sufficient backup could not be sent to help the Naturia or the Jurak, and prolonged conflicts are where the worms shine. And after evolving to meet the threat of their new enemies, the worms developed two new advantages. To safeguard the hive mind, the worms sent it along with one army, while a decoy was made to accompany the other. But since the hive mind would be so far away from their forces, the decoy was given the capability to coordinate the large swarm of worms that defended them. And as the battles raged on, they both evolved into powerful, distinct forms. In the Naturia forest, the Worm Queen began to utilize their new, vast, and still growing intelligence to beat the Naturia at their own game, consuming, altering, then regurgitating their minions into forms more suited for the verdant battlefield. No longer constrained by their need for stimuli to adapt, the Queen could use their imagination and critical thinking skills, as well as their mastery of worm biology, to simply craft the perfect soldier for any given situation. In the Jurak Badlands, the Worm King was a perfection of all the physical traits the hive mind had learned over their lengthy invasion. Ablative patterned hide that deflected anything but the most direct blow, with regenerating, chitinous armor beneath to stave off any truer strikes. There was adaptive material just underneath that protected the king from extreme temperatures, and a muscle structure that, while flightless, could still launch them high enough into the air to attack aerial threats without taking any damage when returning to the ground. However, their most formidable weapon was their ability to turn their minions into living weapons. With but a touch, the king could cause the cells of any given worm to start a violent chain reaction, and when thrown, would cause a horrendous explosion that would rend flesh from bone, an attack not even the most resilient of the Genex could defend against. But the introduction of the apex worms was but their first blessing. The second came in the form of the worms that lost their lives in battle, for even in death, the worms still have a duty to their swarm. As a final act of revenge, or perhaps a noble sacrifice to aid their companions, or even just a thoughtless but purposeful biological function, their discorporated bodies began to sink into the ground, these worm cells using the last of their power to terraform anything they touched. All this time, the worms had adapted to the landscape of Terminus, but now, Terminus would adapt to them. Fields and forests that were once fertile and vibrant lay sallow and rotten. Rivers and lakes turned from crystal clear to viscous and gray, like a pool of poisonous mercury. Even the air itself began to grow heavy and stale, almost impossible to breathe. Everything the worms touched began to look like desolate rock floating in the void of space. Even if the worms lost a battle, they would still claim the territory, making it all the easier for the invaders to launch their next attack. Spurned on by Grunard's desire for a swift end to the conflict, Urukwazaz, the commander of the Flamvel armies, disclosed that his scientists had discovered something incredible while studying the inert worm cells. The secret of bending space, opening portals from one place to another, turning the fantasy of travel to distant stars into a reality. Grunard insisted on testing an experimental cosmic gateway built using the resources and technology of Justice, but with knowledge gleaned from worm biology. And while Urukwazaz was more than excited to see if the tech would work, Gotham's objected, as the Thunderlord of Mist Valley was not present. The Worm Queen, fearing what might happen if Catastor was ever revived, sent strike teams across Terminus to make sure supply lines were disrupted, their new flying foes among the Naturia and Jurak providing ample experience for the Queen to make their own flying minions. The Thunderlord was the only one strong enough to withstand the attacks, but these small, infrequent shipments meant that Catastor's repairs were progressing at a snail's pace. However, the Thunderlord would not falter, as there was only a few more trips that needed to be made before Catastor was brought back online. Grunard scoffed at the concern, but seeing that dismissal wouldn't sway Gotham's, argued that, should the gateway be a success, then Thunderlord would no longer need to risk their lives on these solo missions. The worms could be scooped up and deposited into the depths of space with no further loss of life, and Gotham's, finding it difficult to argue with their logic, having fostered a deep respect for their former enemy and not wanting to see them come to harm, relented. The cosmic gateway was activated, and
it appears we've finally been set free. And who were the ones who were so gracious to free us? Warriors in an uneasy alliance. This'll do just nicely. Let us send along a little gift to tide them over until our arrival.
nothing happened. At least, nothing seemed to happen. Official reports would claim that there wasn't enough energy to maintain the portal, but unbeknownst to everyone involved, contact was made, brushing against the borders of a fabled realm. But none of that was on Gotham's mind. As if a seed had been planted in his mind by a patient, devious gardener, the sprout of an idea took hold and would not let go. This all had been for the Thunderlord, for Grisham's own good, but he would despise it if he found out the Council had moved forward with testing experimental technology, especially if it was based on worm findings. But what choice did they have? After all, the residents of the Mist Valley were just superstitious mystics living in caves. What would they know of progress? Thus, he made the other two council members swear that they would not tell the Thunderlord of what had happened there. Gotham's believed that, if the truth was known, it would rend their alliance to pieces. And because of this secrecy, much to the Gardener's delight, Gotham's was right. But despite this, a ray of sunshine did break through the clouds of melancholy that hung over Terminus. Because out of the terraformed muck the worms had left behind, new beings emerged. Lying deep within the ground, these new life forms sprung forth fully formed and ready to accomplish their mission. Immediately, they began to reverse the effects of the worms' terraforming. The air was cleared, the water purified, even the ones with flames erupting from them had a part to play, burning down the corrupted forests so that their ashes could revitalize the land anew. After some observing, it appeared that, while mechanical in form, they were some kind of combination of biology and machinery. They worked tirelessly to fix the damage done to the planet, knowing neither exhaustion nor boredom like a machine, but their seemingly dense outer shells were soft to the touch. They were not cold like iron, but had a gentle warmth, not attending to duties that required extreme temperatures notwithstanding. These seemed to be creatures born of the Earth itself to save itself. And so, since they seemed to be working to safeguard the planet for the next generation, it was proposed by Urukwazas that they be called the Genex. But after some workshopping, it was shortened to Genex. They continued their toil, communicating with neither Justice nor the worms. However, if the latter came close to investigate, the Genex would launch into a fervent, if ineffectual, assault. The Genex hated the creatures that would arrive to ruin the environments they were safeguarding, but they were built to heal, not to harm. But the instinct to protect the planet was there, and this got the gears in Urukwazas' head spinning once again. It was discovered that, despite being sworn enemies, the Genex and worms shared a very distinct characteristic: a hive mind. But where the worms had a dominant core that commanded the swarm, the Genex used it to share information, driven by a common cause of conservation rather than having a single authority. And what was even better, the Genex communicated using a method similar to how they controlled the non-autonomous Ally of Justice units. So, by modifying existing Ally of Justice controllers, using their knowledge of the worm hive mind as a basis, they were able to make a Genex controller. With this, they could transmit combat data from each of the tribes, keying in on the elements that resonated particularly well depending on the Genex. And while the plan was just to send data, the information itself seemed to have a profound effect. Simply by knowing, the Genex's biological components began to morph and evolve, with their mechanical components following suit. And Genex, under the direct support of the controller, morphed into forms much more suited for combat. And so, Justice had gained an advantage that not even their combined might could obtain. A tireless force of combat-ready soldiers that could be deployed at a moment's notice, mostly because, wherever fighting broke out, they were already there. But it was only a matter of time before the Thunderlord of Mist Valley discovered what was going on. He was just as happy as anyone to find out that the Guardians of the Planet were rising up to help reclaim the land, but when he discovered that the Flamvell were modifying them for war, he was conflicted. Had the Genex asked for this? Not likely, as they didn't really have a way to communicate with them, but it was clear how dedicated they were to fighting the worms. The Genex would be doing that with or without the direction of Justice. When someone's homeland is under attack and they want to fight to defend it, you don't tell them to flee for safety, you give them a weapon and train them as best you can so they can survive the coming ordeal. As the chief of his tribe, this was a situation the Thunderlord had been in many times. This wasn't much different.
A rather convenient excuse to experiment on such innocent creatures, wouldn't you say?
A voice rang out in the Thunderlord's mind, as clear and loud as a clarion call.
What is this madness? Explain yourself!
I am one of the Constellars, the heavenly host that comes to save the world in times of great strife and darkness.
The Constellars, angelic beings from among the stars, an ancient legend known across all of Terminus. The Thunderlord was both elated and confused.
Forgive my rudeness, but I am certain Urukwazas means them no harm.
Harm or no, this alliance known as Justice is quickly spiraling out of control. Technological advancements are being made without the slightest bit of caution, consuming knowledge and warping the world around them. Does that sound familiar to you?
But all progress is based on learning and adapting. Surely the worms have something we can learn from, despite how vile they are.
Learn? These scientists cracked open their husks and sucked the knowledge from them like a parasite. And the more they're indulged, the further they'll go. The worms expand endlessly for the sake of survival. It's not malice, it's just what they do. And in the face of an invasion that threatens to wipe them off the face of Terminus, well, I'm sure Justice claims they're doing just the same. But who's to say how far they'll go before they're stopped? They've even begun trying to communicate with the worms.
What?
The worms warp space to travel the distance between planets. It's a power that Urukwazas has discovered while examining their corpses, and has already used that knowledge to make a cosmic gateway to contact them. Who's to say they aren't looking for a way to buy their freedom at your expense? Or even worse, become just like them.
It is perhaps true that Drunard and his companions have their political scruples, and Urukwazas is Perhaps a bit too eager to test the limits of his scientists' research. But these are people that are looking to build a future for their tribe. If nothing else, Gotham's is a stalwart, honorable man who would never betray the trust of his companions.
Oh, Grisham. It was Gotham's who swore the council to secrecy on this.
No.
The truth is painful, but it shall set you free. You are surrounded on all sides by warlords who are too ambitious for their own good. But you must look out for your own tribe. They're depending on you to keep them safe.
What must I do to help them?
There is a council meeting soon, yes? Go and confront them about the ruinous path they are on. Perhaps words will be enough to sway them. But if not, action is always an alternative.
Grisham, the Thunderlord of the Mist Valley, brought his concerns to the council, but to no avail. He was so disgusted with Justice's insistence on adopting the form and function of their enemy that he withdrew him and his tribe from the Alliance. But he knew that if he simply left, all the advancements his people had helped create would remain, and continue to enslave those poor creatures. So when he left, he meant to take everything with him. It would be painful for everyone, but the Thunderlord knew it was the right choice. Anything to keep Justice from walking down the wrong path. On his way out, the great Thunderlord of the Mist Valley barged into the repair bay that Catastor had been in these many months and ripped it to shreds. Without any power, its wide-angle weapons defense systems were useless, and to make sure no more could be made, Thunderlord stormed the records room, gathering all of his people's contributions that he could handle, burned the rest, then crushed the central computer core that housed all the digital backups that Aruquazaz had made. The Mist Valley had well and truly left. This was a huge blow from within. Computers were well within the Flamvel's capacity to make. The natural heat of the ignium-sulfur fields made it simple to mold the raw material, and the more delicate pieces of circuitry could be built off-site. But it was hard, expensive work, so despite how important that information was, no backups had ever been made. So there was no recovering the data within the computer. It could be remade, with all the knowledge of the ice barriers, Flamvels, and x-sabers, but they could rely upon the Mist Valley no longer. Retaliatory action would not come. Thunderlord acted too swiftly for their defenses to kick in. An army could be sent to pursue Thunderlord, but the worms were too constant a threat, and the forces could not be spared to do so. But even beyond all that, an even more pressing matter had been brought to the Council's attention. For almost as soon as the Thunderlord Grisham had left, a new figure arrived and introduced themselves.
My name is Valkyrus, and I have come to offer you salvation.
Thank you all so much for listening to my interpretation of the living history of Duel Terminal. Please make sure to share this video with anyone else you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially Yu-Gi-Oh! Lore, and let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. I'd like to take this time to thank the lovely patrons who helped make this all possible, including our Quasar Commander, J. Yuri Boy, Nebula Navigators, The Wizard Moose and the Fresh Prince of Conair, Cosmic Crusaders, Chaz Ghost, Colin Todd, Panda PLS, Legendary Raven, and Shep Shao Shep, as well as the many Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. You can also find my Patreon in the description, which will help me make more videos like this more often. Anything you can do to help me in any of these regards would be greatly appreciated. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.